Hey, good morning, everyone. Jared Riot of Riot Heart Media, reporting in from the Riot House, the Riot Heart Studio. This beautiful Saturday morning, cold, beautiful Saturday morning, we are going to be joining the HBN Assembly, where they are giving a presentation and having a discussion about the West End TIF, T-I-F. If this is something you're not familiar with, it's probably because it kind of flew in under the radar. Some legislation was passed without anybody really knowing, creating this independent organization that will basically be in charge of some of the funding that goes into the West End of Louisville now. So historically, in majority of cities throughout the United States, TIFs, tax increment funding districts, have not worked. So the idea behind it is essentially 9 neighborhoods in the West End will have all of their taxes frozen at 80% of what the property tax value is as of January 2022. So again, the property value at the January 2022 assessment will be frozen at 80% for something like, I think it was 20 years maybe. So it sounds good, right? Like property taxes are frozen, any amount that is above, you will pay, you'll get a credit back. So that sounds like it's good for anyone that owns a house, correct? So some of the problems here is that it's got a board of something like 21, 22 individuals on the West End Partnership. West End Partnership Opportunity, I believe is what they're calling it. But again, this is a privatized organization that is going to be in charge of any taxes above that 80% for that 20 years will go into this organization, and then they will reinvest back into the community. That creates problems because what if you don't have community representation on that board? They're supposed to have one individual from each neighborhood, the 9 neighborhoods in the West End, but there's already been several individuals that have dropped from the assembly. So it's really just interesting turn of events that's been going on over this last several months. The legislation was initially passed back in spring, but hasn't come to full fruition. It is still possible to reverse that, and the Historic Black Neighborhood Assembly is attempting to get information out there to make sure that we can stop the West End TIF. I know I threw a whole lot of words out there at you real quick. I was actually kind of trying to collect my thoughts as I was telling you. So, you know, while we're waiting for this presentation to start, I'll go ahead and I'll run over that again. Okay, so basically back in this past spring, there was some legislation that was proposed and passed locally to make 9 neighborhoods in the West End of Louisville a TIF, quote unquote, tax increment funding district. So what that does is it freezes property taxes for an extended period, and then any amount of property taxes that are raised past that frozen denomination over the period of the freeze is set aside into a pool. That pool is supposed to be used to reinvest in the West End, you know, to improve it, right? You know, improve its infrastructure, improve its resources, things like that. Now, the issue with tax increment funding districts is, again, historically in the United States, for the mass majority, TIFs just haven't worked in any cities. There's a whole lot of gray area for, I don't know, self-promotion, self-gain. So it can easily just deteriorate into a situation where slumlords and real estate moguls who own the majority of the West End would get that tax bump, right? They're the ones that would see a benefit from the frozen taxes. Unfortunately, a large percentage of the West End are renters, right? So you see the potential for there to be landlords that own, hundreds of buildings and are renting them, and they're getting the benefit of those frozen taxes, but the renters aren't getting any kickbacks whatsoever. So does it really help the community is the question. Again, the HBN Assembly is going to be discussing that here soon. They've been hosting these discussions weekly, nearly weekly, on Saturday mornings around 10 a.m. They've been doing them live in person, but due to the snow and rise in Omicron, they have decided to go ahead and do this one virtually. Even when they do them in person, they do offer virtual as well. They offer a live stream of the discussion. That's what we are waiting on right now, and then I want to make sure that I can share it over with all of you guys. So if you just stay tuned, stay patient with me, we will be getting started shortly. If you want more details on this West End TIF and what is going on, you again could go to www.hbnassembly.org, or you can find HBN Assembly Louisville, Kentucky on Facebook, and they have a lot of details on what's going on. So again, sorry for the holdup. Appreciate your patience, and we will be getting started here shortly. Okay, so we are currently live across all platforms, so you can catch us on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook under Riot Hard Media. Also on Facebook under Jared Wright, and also on the 502 live streamers page, which should be live, so you can check us out on any of those platforms. Just patiently waiting, but we can continue to discuss the TIF just a little bit. Again, it's going to be the West End Opportunity Partnership is what they're calling it. That is going to be the private organization that will have a board of, I think, 21, 22 individuals that are supposed to be in charge of, redistributing this money into the West End. Again, one of the issues is making sure that there's West End representation, right? So if the money's supposed to be improving the West End, who should you talk to about how to improve it? Probably West Indians, I would think. Again, this legislation has been proposed and passed locally. It has not gone into full effect. The Historic Black Neighborhood Association, HBN Assembly, is been trying to educate people off and on, throughout this entire process since last spring. There's been a few times that they've even popped up and tried to ask questions to some of the individuals who penned the legislation. One in particular is prospective Mayor Greenberg. He helped write that legislation. He knows a little bit about real estate because he helped start 21C here in Louisville, and then that turned into a chain throughout the United States. So I don't know. It's something that looks like face value is going to be good, but at the same time, it can easily be turned into an opportunity for people with money to make even more money, leaving people without money in the wayside, which is historically a problem in Louisville with gentrification and the like. So that is the major concern with designating the tax increment funding district, the 9 neighborhoods in the west end of Louisville. So it looks like got a message here. They're going to be rolling at about 1:15. They were supposed to get started at 1, but they are going to be starting here in a few minutes, and I am in the waiting room. Share the live. Make sure people are seeing this. This is important because this could be potentially detrimental to the West End if it's not done correctly. So we need people to see this information and make sure that they understand it. So again, share this live and feel free to comment. I will respond the best that I can while live streaming. Once I'm able to get it over to the actual presentation discussion, then I'll be able to speak, or I'll be able to comment back and forth a little bit more. But again, share, get as many people in here as possible. Some of the details will be a little bland, a little boring, but again, this information is so important. The West End has been historically forgotten for generations here in Louisville, Kentucky, and there are things that are currently being worked on. So the struggle is making sure that the things that are being worked on, the discussions that are being had about how to improve the West End are being had with West Indians, people that live in the West and can deduce what is needed mostly. Kind of talking circles right now, and I apologize for that, but it's only because we are waiting. How we only got one person watching on Facebook. It's the biggest platform we got. Invite your friends. We need to see this information.
Do you want some cream cheese?
Be there soon enough. We will get there together. Will have all of their taxes frozen. Hour and a half. All right, everyone. Really appreciate your patience here. Sorry again. We were supposed to get kicked off with this discussion at 1 o'clock, but they are a little bit behind, it would seem. We are almost there, though. Okay, well, while we wait, again, you can check us out on all kinds of platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok. If you need details on, Right Heart Media in general, we are a nonprofit organization that specializes in uplifting, voices of the unheard. So particularly been focusing on the West End a little bit here lately, especially with this TIF going on. So, make sure you find our platforms and you follow us. You get different content depending on which platform you follow. So, you follow all of them, you get the full spectrum of content. If you are looking to support in any capacity, you can set up, single donation, monthly donation, rightheart.com. Or you can go and purchase one of our lovely t-shirts pictured here. Okay, so still waiting. We're going to be in this discussion very soon. Not that we will be actively participating in the discussion. I'm going to, allow the HBN assembly to give their information and have their discussion. And I am just, again, here to elevate those voices, those opinions. So again, while we're waiting, share the live, share the live, share the live. Check in with your friends, get them to come and check this out. We are really needing to pay attention to what's going on in the west end of Louisville with this TIF. It is, very, very quality, important information. Again, the HBN Assembly, the Historic Black Neighborhood Assembly, has been hosting these discussions every Saturday at 10 a.m. You have been in person previously. Right now, obviously due to inclement weather, the snow, and COVID, Omicron, they decided to go ahead and do only virtual. They usually do in person and also virtual, but today is virtual only. So I'm currently in the waiting room on that Zoom meeting, waiting for the footage, the discussion, the presentation to begin so that we might also be in tune with what's going on. Again, for more details, you can go to www.hbnassembly.org, and we will be able to see, backlog of the discussions. If you go and you find, HBN Assembly Louisville KY on Facebook, you can find all of the discussions.
To get a little more information on the tax increment financing proposed for the West End. We're going to start with a presentation on what a TIF is.
This meeting is being recorded.
Then we'll move into the history of this TIF. We have a couple of folks who were invited to come and speak. And then we'll take a break, and then we'll play a little game that'll simulate the impacts of the TIF on folks in the West End. We're also live on Facebook, so if you're joining us there, feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat, and we'll get them answered toward the end of our presentation today. So we'll go ahead and get started with that video on what is a TIF.
All right, this video can be found on the HBN Assembly website. I'll go ahead and take us there. Let me share screen. So here's the HBN Assembly website. It's at hbnassembly.org. Clicking on the tab West End TIF, it's just / West End TIF. And scrolling down a little to find the explainer.
West End TIF explained. My home or business is within a tax increment.
Oh, sorry, there we go. Let's go ahead and start it from the beginning.
West End TIF explained. My home or business is within a tax increment financing district. What does that mean for me, my family, my property, and my community? What is tax increment financing? What is a TIF? A TIF is an extractive method for paying for development. It takes money from poor and working class people and give it to the rich and propertied class who aim to get richer by gentrifying low-income communities. Essentially, TIFs pass the burden of raising funds for development onto the residents and consumers living and shopping within a specified area known as the TIF district, which is the area that has been earmarked for development. Why was my community established as a TIF district? Typically, the chosen area for a TIF is often a low-income community that has been historically underfunded and divested from by the city and is primarily populated by people living on a low or fixed income. Historically, Black communities are disproportionately targeted under the TIF method. The reason why is because the housing market has been racialized due to decades of racist and classist policies and practices that have systemically blocked the upward economic mobility of Black people since the end of slavery. Historically Black neighborhoods, or HBNs for short, are ideal for greedy developers to establish a TIF district because due to our country's long history of racialized capitalism, HBNs typically have a larger renter population and a smaller homeowner population. This fact means that residents have less control over their land, and therefore developers have a greater chance of taking control of large sums of property with greater ease and within a relatively shorter period of time. Racial capitalism and TIFs. Along with the commodification of housing, which is a human right, decades of white mob violence, speed restrictions, racist and classist lending practices, racist and classist development policies, urban renewal, redlining, and other formal and informal, oftentimes government-sanctioned and normalized systems of oppression have made whiteness a value adder and blackness a value subtractor in the U.S. economy. Meaning a property inhabited by a Black family is valued for less under the current housing and economic system, and a property inhabited by a white family is valued more. And that value increases or decreases based on the concentration of white households versus Black households within an area. This is what the U.S. housing market and economic system is based on. These oppressive and inherently anti-Black systems are tools of capitalism, which of course only benefit the wealthy. The wealthy being those with the greatest access to whiteness. Unfortunately, TIFs bolster and extend the life of this legacy, and on more than one occasion have wiped out whole Black communities by way of displacement and property dispossession in favor of capitalism. As a result, Black history, heritage, and contributions are erased from space. How do TIFs work? TIFs create a developer slush fund that wealthy developers may draw from to make it easier and cheaper for them to gentrify an area. For a TIF to be successful, it needs to extract as much money from current residents and consumers as possible to fill the fund. By design, TIFs need property and sales taxes to increase within the TIF district. Why? Because the developer slush fund that TIFs create can only draw money from tax increases that occur during the life of the TIF, which is typically 20 or 30 years. As mid and high income properties are developed and affluent residents move in, property values rise and so do taxes along with them. These increases in tax dollars fill the developer slush fund for later use. The developer slush fund is designed to exist outside of public control and can no longer be regulated through the government's democratic process. Instead, the slush fund is controlled by a third party, who often have large investments in real estate within the TIF district and therefore stand to benefit from its gentrification. This third-party group then uses the tax dollars within the slush fund to build commercial and residential properties for future affluent residents and consumers. More on who are these new developments for and how will that impact current residents. These new developments are for an affluent class of people who do not yet live in the area. These new developments and the affluent people they attract increase the property value of the area, which in turn influences the local Property Valuation Administration, or PVA, to increase property taxes within the TIF district. Property owners are then subjected to increased property taxes that they may or may not be able to afford. Landlords who own property oftentimes pass the cost burden of those increased taxes onto their renters by increasing their rents. Some landlords may choose to increase rents beyond the affordability of current residents to also attract affluent tenants to replace current low or fixed income tenants. Other consequences of TIFs. As the value of property in the area increases, other developers interested in making a profit off of this situation may have greater motivation to attempt to acquire properties within the TIF district. These developers typically will ramp up their asks to home and property owners to sell their land to them. In some cases, these developers may even use code regulation and law enforcement to apply financial pressure on home and property owners to make hanging on to their property increasingly more difficult due to the rising expense of repair, fines, and liens. Some homeowners may experience an increase in fines and nuisance violations being issued on their property, while also receiving more offers to purchase their land. These predatory developers oftentimes offer lower than market rate payment in exchange for homes owned by Black people due to the racialization of the housing market, which is normalized under capitalism in the U.S. Displacement and houselessness. As taxes and rents increase within the TIF district, the affordability of the area decreases for current residents. As affordability decreases for current residents, many will be forced to leave their community in search of a place that they can afford to live. As residents are displaced due to the rises in their cost of living, those who are unable to find more affordable housing will likely become houseless in the current housing system. Meaning, some residents living within the TIF district may be forced to live on couches of relatives, out of their car, or forced to join a tent community because there are no other affordable housing options that exist in their city. To summarize, TIFs are inherently extractive, and they center the prosperity of the wealthy. TIFs essentially force low and fixed income residents and consumers to pay for the development that would inevitably displace them. This displacement is due to the consequence of rapidly rising costs in living, which are a standard outcome of a successful TIF. We can stop this. We invite you to join the fight to stop the West End TIF by signing the petition and participating in the Stop the TIF letter writing campaign. We thank you for your time.
All right. Next, we have community organizer and social worker Amira Granger, who will explain some of the history of the West End TIF.
Trying to make sure my
If everyone except for Amira could mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
We may have to turn down the volume on the in-person session so that you can speak. They should be able to hear you in the room, and then just be unmuted for everyone on Zoom and watching from Facebook.
Okay. All right. Write it down. Okay. All right, following the, everyone can hear me. I'm going to try to talk through my mask. I just want to make sure they can hear online. Can you all hear online?
We hear you well.
Okay, great. Okay. We've had a couple of different presentations. One, my name is Amira Granger. I live in the Chickasaw neighborhood, born and raised in Louisville. I love Louisville, and I'm really disturbed by this effort, particularly because community members and residents have not been engaged like they should. And so we want to share some reactions from neighbors at one of the meetings that was held by residents. We didn't get a lot of answers, but at least you can kind of get a feel for some of the dealings that have happened with residents in terms of the answers given and the answers withheld. This was an event at California Park
You're cutting out a little bit, Amira. I don't know if you can face the mic. So while you talk to them, could you face the mic?
Okay. I know we're playing video here.
The Mariel's video goes at the
Residents
end.
reacting.
Oh, the residents.
Okay. We can go to the next slide if that's going.
Let us know when you want to change slides. Right now,
Yes, change slides.
Okay.
We'll have the resident react share in a minute. Yes, I'm gonna stand up here so just trying to follow the slides. Can you all see? We could turn all the lights off and it might help, but I didn't know if that makes people uncomfortable or not.
Did you want to be on the chapter header slide first?
That's fine. And
So the chapter header says, who is behind the West End TIF? Is that the one you want? Or do you want the investment is not a tide that lifts all ships? You're currently, we cannot hear you currently if you are talking.
okay, Scooby-Doo, I think.
Scooby-Doo? Okay.
I'm
There we
holding
go.
a phone and a laptop. So
You're amazing. Thank you.
okay. So can we go to the next slide? I'm not sure what. Am I not seeing the slide?
Slide's there, but you're not hit by.
On
So
this?
she needs to click it.
It might be frozen for folks. Hold on, let me stop sharing and reshare. How's
I'm
that?
good, but okay.
Can folks see the Scooby-Doo?
Can I see the screen with the preview so that way I'm just gonna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you see this slide? It says, who's behind the West End TIF?
Can you say that again?
The slide is purple and says,
Yeah.
who is behind the West End TIF?
Yeah. Okay.
Can folks that are on the Zoom see the slide as well? Message, I can see it in the chat if you can see the
All right.
chat.
Not really sure. Okay, I'm going to try to log back in and look at my notes, but I've done this a couple times. So we're talking about who's behind the West End TIF. A lot of times people have presented or said that it's resident-led, that it comes from what the people have expressed that they want. They said they've had sessions with different people, but a lot of times that answer, the concrete information is elusive and definitely hasn't been forthcoming. But we've done the research and looked behind it. We go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
And there's it's not a Black-led organization. This is Steve Poe. And so for those who maybe don't know, we go to the next slide. Steve Poe is a developer in town. He's not the only one involved in this. Steve Poe is the gentleman sitting to the right as you look at the screen, one of the developers in town who had some really interesting ideas. On this slide here, for those who maybe can't see it, those in person who can't see it as crisp on their screen, Steve Poe started the nonprofit One West, something some of us have probably heard about, in 2014 to sustain his development interest. He talked about a West End TIF on a panel in 2015. So when they say that it came from the community, well, we have a history of things otherwise. So you have with One West, Yvonne Smith helping to write this TIF legislation. Poll companies have lobbied for TIF legislation. And so I think, again, have we had the opportunity as community members to lobby against it or to even be aware that it was coming forward? And so an additional thing to be aware of, individuals in our community who are leaders or people who express their concern and love for the community, but they're involved in this effort. I'll let them remain nameless, but their names are listed here. One West has loaned the TIF board $30,000, and the affiliations go on. So you see at the bottom of the screen, there are individuals appointed to the WEOP board who are affiliated with Poe and One West. And so you see Mr. Devon Holt, Ms. Shadle here, those two individuals highlighted in yellow. The connections don't end with this, though. Let's go to the next slide. And we can make this available if people would like to have this information moving forward. Don't feel like we don't want to keep secrets. We have another developer and profile person. This gentleman running for mayor, Craig Greenberg, was one of the instrumental people in writing this TIF. He is very familiar with writings of this nature. He expressed in his own words that he felt like this would be good for the community and seemed to be perplexed as to why that doesn't make sense when he is not a community member. You see here at the bottom some individuals from Greenberg's camp. Greenberg is affiliated with Republic Bank. He is actually a director for them. And so you kind of see a conflict of interest in that concern with Republic Bank being on the WEOP board over any of us being appointed, nominated, or serving on such board. Additionally, you have this kickback of who is responsible to who. So you have Greenberg, who is running for mayor, who's also director for a bank, putting someone from the bank on the board. How does that circle of operation work for us? One other thing to just be aware of, Greenberg opened an urban revitalization firm in the same time period that this TIF was being presented. So again, urban revitalization. Maybe he knew something was coming down the pike. We can go to the next slide. We definitely feel like this is a conflict of interest. So we want to get into talking about a timeline. We were extending the opportunity for Senator Neal and for Devon Holt to speak on this TIF effort. I'm not sure if they are still going to join us. One expressed that they would, and the other said they might. We'll see if they take advantage of that opportunity to share their stance and support of this effort. But just so we can circle back, because it is a lot, we're trying to just present as much as we can, but we realize that it can be overwhelming. So again, in 2015, Steve Poe is the first person that we hear of that proposed the West End TIF. We have, Craig Greenberg involved. We have One West helping to write this TIF with different core members, like Nikki Lanier, Yvonne Smith. Moving forward, you have different companies formed and lobbying around this TIF bill. Again, we heard about it in the early part of 2021, but we didn't have enough time to really get our community to even understand what is going on, to even have the opportunity to get to Frankfurt to rally against it. By the time we heard about it, they voted it up in the midnight hour, literally, at the end of March. And so here we are on the timeline, just saying February, the TIF is publicly announced. We had council members saying they weren't aware of it, different people who are involved in organizations and community groups that weren't aware of it. So who did they consult? So again, we follow this timeline. We look forward to any of those individuals who are elected officials or individuals we name to present actual residents they spoke with. Again, in March, when they voted it up, Black Lives Matter had a TIF panel with Senator Neal and Craig Greenberg. where they spoke about they had worked with people, and they had a very candid conversation. I believe that is public on Facebook. You can check that out. So again, they passed it at the end of March. In April, there was a letter submitted from the Coalition of West Louisville Neighborhood Associations, just kind of expressing how disturbing this effort was. A member of the HBNA, who also participates with this group at that time, expressed that her concern for that, and that people need to be concerned about the alignment with One West and the support of this TIF. In April, you have the governor signing on to it. Not sure if the governor is fully aware of it, but either way, a problem in itself. And then here we are in August, where residents were organizing to launch the Stop the TIF campaign. We can go to the next slide. So some other things that have occurred in the meantime, we just kind of updated to just keep you abreast of things. They've had this WEOP, the switching of terms. So Senator Neal and a lot of people, they know they don't want the bad word to be the public word that people keep gripping onto. So they started using this opportunity partnership and trying to push that West End opportunity thing as the new buzzword, rather than connecting it to the TIF, which it is expressly connected. There's no way for one without the other. And so in August of 2021, we have Mr. Brown writing a memo to the governor, quoting a previous email from the Federal Reserve, withdrawing their support of this effort, withdrawing from the board, and they are written into the legislation as they have to be a part. So again, they're operating aside from what they voted on. Okay, so again, they're moving forward, even though it's not there. We run out of battery? Say it again. The Federal Reserve. So in terms of banking, so their appointee, if I'm correct, was Sadiqa Reynolds. She was around for a minute. We'll get to that in just a second. But in August, they knew that the Federal Reserve had an issue with participating with this. Next thing, in September, the Stop the TIF campaign disrupted the WEOP board meeting. It was held at the University of Louisville. It was supposedly open to the public, but they were not welcoming to those who came from this community. It was a very colorful meeting, but we demanded that there was increased resident access and input during board meetings. In September, just to note, Churchill Downs pledges $1 million to the WEOP. So to this West End Opportunity Partnership, you have to think, why does Churchill Downs want to why does Churchill Downs need to put in $1 million? Now, that is something that they need to raise so much money. Metro Council has promised $10 million towards this, so they have to get to a certain point, but they need to raise this other money. So it seems to, it is a very interesting thing. We'll come back to that. In October, I have a question from the room. We don't know. They pledged $1 million to that board and all the things that are written into what that board can do, which is a lot. But so the Churchill Downs made some other announcements too. So it seems to be a connection here of people getting ready. They haven't. Well, you saying Churchill Downs has not? Yeah. Okay. Well, and so, okay, so that's one thing I think that was kind of shared, but just to recap, yes, the WEOP has not identified what projects they will work on. In some settings, they say it's about what the community wants. They want to get us hyped up to say that they'll be listening to us, helping our businesses and our homeowners do things. But then on the other hand, remember in October during the WEOP meeting, it was the first meeting held in the West End at the YMCA. They did not choose the biggest space, so they weren't ready to accommodate anyone, and they did not have space on the agenda for community reaction or comment. So again, that just shows you their interest or not in hearing from what the people have to say. There were 2 members of that board that resigned that day, so that is to take note of. So you have a lot of people separating themselves from it, a lot of people saying that this isn't right, including big money things like the Federal Reserve. That's a critical piece. People who deal with money saying this isn't good is something we need to take note of. So moving into November, the Stop the TIF campaign hosts activists and information panel on the economics of this. So again, we hosted it because it needed to be known, but also because they weren't presenting this. So how are you writing things to have it enacted in law, but you aren't presenting the numbers? And it's about taxes. So to your point, in November also, the We Are Board, they limited community input without discussion. So they let people talk, but they kept it moving. They didn't respond to anyone. And so there was a vote initially for their unique groups to be able to benefit financially from it. That was a meeting that we weren't present for, but we heard about that. But then also in December, the board voted, without those neighborhood representatives, the board voted to proceed with obtaining nonprofit status despite community opposition. So there were individuals who attended who said, don't do this. There were also board members who said, I don't think this is a good idea. They pushed it through and they voted it up. Okay. So just so you know, there are no neighborhood representatives voting yet. And they still had that. And actually, we're not even sure if they had a quorum that really makes sense, but they voted based on whoever was in that meeting in December. Next slide. I think we went a little long. I apologize for that. So our screen went down. I'll try to get us back. We might be out of juice. But we have an image of a little girl here. Don't sell the land out from under my feet. And so it's not just about us that we're concerned about. Obviously, it's our future as well. And so for those of us who want to be comfortable in the next 20 to 30 years, those of us who think about and have been thinking about what we will pass on to our children, our loved ones, our friends. And so it's definitely something that we don't feel like that's the consideration for. Weather changes. We know we had the storms recently that devastated a lot of areas in Kentucky. So clearly weather patterns are changing. We also have inflation of food prices, gas prices, LG&E and water and MSD. So those are regular things that we all have to think about all the time. So how dare someone come about and say that we should tax your area? This TIF is unique in the fact it's not about a project like the Omni or the Yum Center, which is the location, a small area. And those were problematic. Nobody's saying those were success stories. Those problematic TIFs in their own were very small scale. But this is an effort that seems to be an experiment to see if they can push it over on the people and get a big area of land and just run it through. And that's what they started with, but we're pushing back, and we ask that you join us with that. So the little girl here in the image is just to remind you that what are we going to leave? What legacy will we leave? Are we standing up against it? Are we going to be okay to be, down the road? Are we going to be okay? I think that might be my last slide. So we have some individuals, I'll try to hold this up, elected officials as well as individuals who are running for office who have signed on to our campaign. That means they have signed a petition, they have spoken out against it, and we hope that they will continue. We hope to add to it. Some people voted when they were in Frankfurt against this effort. And so here, we see Shamika Parrish-Wright, Ja'Cory Arthur, Charles Booker. We have a petition online. We have papers here that you can sign as well. But we just want to spread the word and make sure people know, because the closer this moves, they want Metro Council to vote it up. James is the president of the council and also the acting president of this We Are board. And he has shown that he is willing to keep this moving, regardless of the community input, regardless of the community members absent from the board at this time. I think, next slide. I'm sorry, the screen, I'll try to get that up for you guys. Let me say that Attica Scott did vote against this in the little midnight hour vote that they had. You can check that out and kind of see how people voted up and voted down, but she did in the end vote against it and has maintained that. And so that's just something to be aware of. Some of our elected officials have been recorded saying one thing in favor of the community and then the next minute voting differently or speaking out in favor of the community and constantly meeting with people who aren't in the community about things that affect the community. So just be aware. Our website here, I'm trying to show that. The HBN Assembly is a collection of many people from around the city. Obviously, all of the historically Black neighborhoods are not so much in the West End only, but we do want to recognize the fact that there is a historical relevance to protecting our neighborhoods and making sure we're not devastated by efforts such as this. If you go onto our website, you can find information. You can find a lot of the recordings and things that we've had. before and kind of just, get more information for yourself or for others. You can also sign the petition. We have a letter writing campaign, and you can participate in that through this. So we have a lot of resources on here, not just fluff, not just press releases, not just photographs. So we have a lot of great information on here. Again, it's individuals and organizations that are part of HBNA. So we want people to know that you can be a part of that. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Amira. There was a lot of information. So let's just take a few minutes. If anyone has a question, you can feel free to put that in the chat or take yourself off mute and shout that question out, and we'd be happy to answer for you. So I'll just take a brief pause if anyone has a question.
Hey, Mariel, this is Ebony. I have two questions. I actually just sent them to Rita Phillips, but I haven't been keeping up. So I wanted to know, has the remainder of the board been appointed? And then secondly, I know applications had gone out or letters had gone out so that people could apply to be on the advisory board. Have those people been chosen yet, or where are they in that process?
So to my knowledge, first with the application going out, you can access the application online, or you can pick up a hard copy at the Urban League. That's not very inclusive of people. They could offer more locations to pick up a hard copy, or like they did in the beginning, mailing them out directly to folks' homes so people would know that an application was something that needed to be completed. And then your second question about seats on the board, all of the community seats have not yet been filled. At least they haven't been announced publicly. I think maybe 4 of the community seats have been filled so far.
May I also?
Okay, so with regard to the application, to the applications, though, they're still not done with that process of choosing from the applicants. That's like still an open thing.
It is open as far as it's been announced publicly. Jessica, you were going to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I was going to add to folks' information in general, because as we talk about this, there's 2 things that I want to make sure we lift up in the conversation. The West End is 9 neighborhoods. There's other ones too, beyond that, a few little ones that don't usually get officially recognized, but it's minimum 9 historically Black neighborhoods with 60,000 households in question here. 60,000 households. The median income for the area is about $25,000 annual median income or annual income. And the other thing I wanted to point out is in this moment where we hear representatives of the West End TIF from the West End Opportunity Partnership, which is the nonprofit that manages the TIF. What we keep hearing is that this is money coming in, and that this money may be the only money that we get to develop our community. That is what they keep saying. There are other alternatives outside of this TIF to do development that actually stabilizes our neighborhood, that allows our folks to remain in our neighborhoods. And the HBN Assembly has been building a progressive plan around developing self-governed freedom colonies across the historically Black neighborhoods through community land trusts. And this community land trust would be run by residents, no one else. And it would be run by communities. Like if you are in California, then you would have your own committee that would run that one. If you are in Russell, same thing. So same thing. But we're all under one larger one because we're seeing the same problems in historical Black neighborhoods across the city. And this is an immediate solution that we can start onboarding together without having wealthy developers being involved. These wealthy developers are just finding ways to fund their own projects and initiatives, from you all, from all of us, through our tax dollars, through our sales dollars, from public dollars. They get access to public land and public monies with a lot greater ease. But now that we are in 2021, there's a lot more available funds that can be tapped for democratically controlled programs like what this HBN CLT will be. There's more information about the CLT on the website, as well as other things that the work has been doing.
Thank you, Jessica. Any other questions? All
We have a
right.
question in person.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know what the website is.
It's www.hbnassembly.org.
Another question in person.
Okay, so the question that I have, if nobody is in favor of this, how are the 9 communities coming together? Because they already have the neighborhood associations. So are they involved in any of this? And then are they willing to become a part of this? Because these meetings have to be more frequent.
I can respond to that. Yes, so we are trying to have as many meetings as we can. This campaign to stop the West End TIF, which is coming out of the HBN Assembly. The HBN Assembly is a new organization that only started earlier in 2021. And the campaign was launched in August. We were able to start hosting regular meetings only at the end of last year. And so now that we are in 2022, we're looking for as many sites as will host us so that we can do pop-up events. We were doing pop-up events at neighborhood association meetings last year. We did online sessions that were weekly in December, and we want to continue doing that. And so for any folks that would invite us to come, even if it's just to go to your church group, we would love to be there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll have another spot for questions a little later in the program. So if you're thinking on something, you can wait until then, or this is your last chance at this moment. Okay, so we invited Senator Gerald Neal and WEOP board member Devon Holt. If you are in the audience, now would be your chance to speak. Senator Gerald Neal or Devon Holt. Okay, maybe next time they will join us. So now we will go into some of what the experts say. As Amira noted, we held a panel with a Black economist group called Activist, and now we'll play a few of their clips so that you can understand what people with actual financial experience have to say about TIFs.
So these clips are available on the website, on the West End TIF page. So you can revisit this at any time. And there are multiple clips. For many of the questions that were asked in that session, we made them into their own clips. So we'll start with the introduction.
Just a little background on us. Our organization is called Activist, and we specifically focus on municipal finance research, and particularly looking at something we call fiscal justice. So we talk about communities and cities that treat their residents fairly, actually realizing stronger financial outcomes, and of course the inverse is true when you're choosing exploitative financial and policy practices that you see, that you open yourselves up to greater financial and social risk. So we are a Black-owned and Black-led firm founded in 2016, and we're comprised of activists, financial professionals, researchers. This is 2 of us. There's about 7 of us in all, and then a network of just folks that we work with around the United States and in different cities. So our approach kind of blends economic modeling, financial analysis, and social policy research. And so we'll try to share a little bit of that today with you on Louisville, and I think some other examples of TIFs that we've seen really and the negative impacts of those. Amira, I wonder if you kick us off. And Amira, thank you for that question. I think we'll start probably just by talking about TIFs a bit in general. I've heard some of the rhetoric about how TIFs are explained. And I think it's important to start with really talking about what they are and who they impact.
As we go through, thank you again for just making this available to have this discussion and us to really put energy to this change that needs to happen in this community as well as in policy around TIFs. So, I mean, to get to one of the big flags is TIFs is just becoming such a common tool for many cities, right? It's becoming the most common tool for economic development. And part of that reason is there is a reluctance to talk about what is needed to fund projects now and a desire to make development look like there's no new tax money needed in order to build out, right? So it's like TIFs allow that. It allows you to push this off and act like there's nothing happening here. Just future debt payments will be on your backs, but don't worry about it today. And I think that makes it for easy political shenanigans. And part of the process of how TIFs even became part of the use in cities is, especially amongst Republican states, was this idea that Democratic communities, cities could find a way to get money siphoned off basically to their communities that wouldn't necessarily, and not block development that doesn't match what maybe the state would like. And so that conflict is apparent in the TIF structure in terms of like how cities and states interact around it, share both the economics and responsibilities. And I think one of the things that comes up is it allows for a creation of these structures that don't have a lot of governance. And I think that's the biggest red flag. It's like a lack of governance, the lack of proper oversight, the lack of planning and inclusion in community. And that's allowed because of this creation of this economic corporation, right? This, entity that then is able to be created as a TIF inside our communities. And so that red flag continues throughout Louisville, not in just this TIF, but in past TIFs. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that shows up in other ways.
Okay, let's go with the clip.
I think looking big picture broadly at TIFs, what we see these as is tools for the city to really invest in bringing in new business and a new residents, right? So I think at its core, TIFs are a tool for investing in private property over the public good. This is a classic property over people kind of calculus that's being made. And the basic kind of frame for this, and we see this is true in Louisville, and I'll give you some other examples after this, but that it's these abatements or tax breaks, I think is the easiest way to say it, and through TIFs and other avenues that give up public money to private business. And then you have, and I saw somewhere in the comments someone was mentioning LMPD, you beat me to it, but you have something called development-driven policing, right? And so you've got an increase in policing. This is well documented in a number of big cities. New York has probably one of the best studies on this, but obviously we've seen the conditions for that in Louisville, and that leading to a really, to a really violent outcome in the case of Miss Breonna Taylor in the last year. But there's so many examples of this where that development kind of drives an increase in policing, and that also leads to displacement of existing residents, and I think what Amira talked about, some of those other factors of just what makes the community, what ties folks together, anchor institutions and the like. All the while, the option is still, and it's always available, and should be the first option, is to just invest in the existing residents in a meaningful way, not just businesses. And so I think that I believe it was mentioned maybe briefly in the chat earlier, but when we're looking at the wealth gap and the lack of investment in whether it's in a fair investment in schools, whether we're looking at fair hiring and payment, but looking at the 2019 numbers, it's roughly around 60 million in additional tax revenue for the city, where they could just work towards closing that gap. So, and I think we know the social benefits of that, that's huge for when we're talking about actually investing and making sure folks are earning a fair wage, and there isn't this parity, or this, there's parity with Black and white residents and what they're earning in Louisville, and accountability around that. There are plenty of ways the city could be investing in that, and that does result in greater and stronger tax revenues for them, as opposed to some of these other things we're seeing, particularly with abatements. We actually started in the wake of Michael Brown's murder in Ferguson, and the story there is, we went down there and we're talking to folks on the ground and learning more about what the conditions were that created this environment for this really tragic murder. And part of what we learned was that the city had an over-reliance on fines and fees, right? So the police going around and just giving arbitrary tickets and basically taxation by citation from the predominantly white police force, extracting this wealth from the predominantly Black population there. And they were doing that. So you go one step back further, and there's obvious just ingrained racism in that system. But in addition to that, the city had actually given a tax abatement away to a Fortune 500 company, Emerson Electric, and by doing so created a significant gap in their budget and tried to fill this hole, and of course turn to extracting wealth from the Black residents to do this. And so this poor decision to try and incentivize a business to come there instead of investing in residents created all kinds of things. So budget shortfalls that led to cuts in social services, and ultimately this over-reliance on policing as a way to solve this. And in many ways, you can see pretty clearly how Louisville is on a similar path. And I think the last thing I'll say is, in Louisville and in Ferguson, what happened after that was that they then came under investigation by the DOJ, and their credit rating, so their ability to get debt, and how basically the credit agencies and the lending world reflects how worthy they are of getting additional bonds and money, downgraded them to junk status. Further down that path in the last year, we've seen the Ferguson council was voting on dissolution. And that's how bad, that's how much that erodes the financial and social really core of a city. So I think I was starting to say that, it's very easy to see some similarities with Louisville right now. And I think that's certainly cause for concern, seeing what that kind of corporate tax abatement can do to a city. As we said, and I've seen a number of folks' questions both in this chat and before this, there are just a litany of questions about this and really a lack of some of the most basic information about that. So I wish we could give even more of that detail about that, but unfortunately there's very little available. But I offer up that example just to point to what really can happen.
And I would say investors are also kind of skittish around investing in a TIF if the whole community thinks it's not good, right? Because it's really a decision for the community every year in a budget process to decide to keep paying. So it doesn't really, it's not comforting for investors to believe that like everyone hates this, but I'm going to put money.
Number 9.
That links to this too. So recently there were some ordinances passed or just all kinds of changes that kind of went under the radar with COVID and with sneaky, shady politics. But one dealing with making it easier for the city to acquire properties that are, with liens on them, making it much easier for them to do so much quicker. Also, we had changes to the process for neighborhoods to claim their space as a historic neighborhood or a preservation area where you would maybe be able to protect yourself from some of these development activities. Unfortunately, when you look at the West, most areas are not under that title. And so you have this TIF that seems to definitely capitalize on that opportunity succinctly. But I just want to ask you, with what you just mentioned, who would hold that bill? And then with those new developments in terms of laws and ordinances, with the donations coming in from Churchill Downs, fundraisers being hosted by these different parties and putting in $500,000 here or a couple of million there, are those people putting a pin in for their future development interests over the supposed communities projects that we are going to be able to have our input on once they find representatives? That was an extremely long question, but hopefully you.
Yeah, it was good. I was hoping to give Chelsea space to, feels like a Chelsea framework.
I was going to say, I think you're on a roll, Mary. You've done more of a particularly here in Louisville.
Yeah. So I would say, just from how this process has gone through, definitely seems like Churchill Downs is real happy with their last TIF and real happy with how things are going in general and want to continue. And so it seems like a lot of private entities here see this as an opportunity. No. And I hear language that sounds like excitement around social progress, but not seeing any like thought or analysis or hard questions around how that is done or executed. So what I have seen is just an excitement either for social capital to be part of this or for capital to be part of this, and not a lot of focus on how. I just think you have to be asking the questions of who has the power here and how will people be impacted. And I don't see a lot of the people that have put money up asking those questions, particularly Churchill Downs.
And then the last video that we'll play today from this panel is this one. All of these videos are available on the HBN website.
This question is, are there any examples of TIFs that include rules that minimize the amount of TIF monies that go to folks outside of the community? Are there any that require that funds go to projects initiated by the people living within the neighborhoods impacted by the TIF?
Chelsea, would you like to start before I give my bad news?
That's it. That is, okay, I'm sorry. I will say that there are organizations who have put out what could be in TIFs, what could be more binding agreements, what some of those benchmarks informed by like the community, what those ought to look like. I'm really hard pressed to find examples. I mean, truly hard pressed. This is it's not something that would naturally come up in our research. Unfortunately, it's usually the inverse, and I think that gets back to the fact that TIFs are just inherently extractive, right? And I think they are set up as a tool to benefit business. And it's, I think Justin and I were saying at the top of this before we started, in its simplest, it is bizarre to think that you're going to say, let's work towards improving a community and just give these exorbitant kind of public monies to private interests. I think that without any kind of protection provisions for actually investing in the community, not displacing them, and I think we know just by virtue of capitalism that is often, if not always, misaligned with the interests of housing, living, place, community, thriving. And so I think, yeah, that is my short answer. Amira, do you have, you said more bad news to add to that?
Ebony, I was thinking a lot about this question when I saw it come in. So I've given a lot of thought, and I've thought about trying to be open to where have I seen it done well or seen some examples of that. I have seen people do research and us even talk about like what we think could be out there. I love what Jessica just before, like all these people with amazing ideas of like, yeah, we could do this differently and it could be dope and we can all live here. But unfortunately, when you think about how it's structured from the beginning, right, like it starts with a developer. Like it doesn't start with like, unfortunately, it didn't start with us talking about the West End. It didn't start with like, how do we make people in the West End have this? Right? It started with someone thinking there was an opportunity here and how to extract the most from that opportunity, how to get the city to help, how to get subsidies, how to get it through, how to do it on a wholesale level so you don't have to work with one renter at a time. You can move whole blocks. And like, so all of it's incentivized to do this. Even in the pay structure, even in the benefits for hiring people, it's all set up to have, part of what Mayor Fisher has been on record saying is like, come here because we can offer you these cheaper alternatives. And like, you can't really run away from all of those incentives that are all based on like extraction. And I think it's no accident we haven't seen it. I think I would love to see like, a community-driven TIF in a way that is completely outside of the framework of what currently exists, but I have not seen it.
Again, those are available on the website. It's part of a larger series of clips. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. So we have heard from the experts, we have heard from the community, we have learned the history of the West End TIF so far. So let's take a little bit of a break just in case you need to stretch, get yourself some water, handle your biological needs. We'll take a 3-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll go into breakout rooms after I explain the rules of the game. So I'll see you back in 3 minutes.